My dad called me his little soldier, said I was tough, said I could handle things. I didn't realize soldiers aren't supposed to cry. Hey, my name is Jordan. I'm 22, and I learned really early that when adults praise a child for being strong, sometimes what they really mean is, thank you for asking for less. The first time Dad called me his little soldier, I was 7. Mom had locked herself in the bedroom after another fight. Danny was crying in the kitchen. The TV was still on. Nobody was watching it. Dad crouched in front of me, put both hands on my shoulders, and said, I need my little soldier right now, okay? Okay. That word changes kids. Nobody talks about that enough. Adults say okay and children hear responsibility. I remember nodding immediately. I remember feeling proud, like I'd just been promoted into something important. I didn't understand yet that children are not supposed to become emotional support beams for collapsing adults. After Dad left, that word stayed. Soldier. Mom used it too sometimes. You're so strong, Jordan. You're my rock. I don't know what I'd do without you. And those words sound loving. They do, especially when you're little. But eventually, you realize nobody checks if the rock is cracking. Nobody asks the strong kid if they're scared too. Because strong kids become comforting to adults. And once adults find comfort in you, they stop noticing how much it's costing you to provide it. By 9, I knew how to read the room better than most grown-ups. I could tell how bad money was based on how hard Mom closed cabinets. I could tell whether she and Dad had spoken recently by how long she stared at the sink while washing dishes. I could tell when Danny needed distracting before he even started crying. Children notice everything. They just don't have language for it yet. That's the tragedy. Adults call it maturity, but a lot of the time it's just hypervigilance with good manners. I became useful very early. I packed lunches, watched Danny after school, helped Mom remember appointments, stayed quiet when she seemed overwhelmed. And nobody forced me exactly. That's important. Nobody sat me down and said, Jordan, your childhood is over now. It happened slowly, quietly in little moments. Mom sighing heavily while opening bills. Dad not calling when he said he would. Danny needing things constantly because he was younger. And me realizing that if I became easier, life became smoother for everybody else. So I became easier. That's the thing people don't understand about kids like me. We aren't naturally low maintenance. We just learn very early that having needs feels dangerous. Because every time you add pressure to an already struggling household, you feel guilty. So eventually, you stop asking. Not because the needs disappear, because shame gets there first. When I was 12, I got sick for almost a week, high fever, couldn't stop coughing, could barely stand long enough to shower. And my first thought wasn't, I need someone to take care of me. It was, who's gonna help Danny with homework? I was 12. That sentence should break your heart. It breaks mine now. Back then, it just felt normal. At school, teachers loved me. I turned assignments in early, never caused problems, never talked back. Adults love children who make life easier. What they don't always realize is that some children behave perfectly because they're terrified of becoming one more burden. I failed a math test once at 14. First test I'd ever failed. Mom looked at the grade for maybe 3 seconds and said, "This isn't like you." That was it. No concern, no conversation, no "are you okay?" Just confusion. Like I had malfunctioned somehow. And honestly, that hurt more than yelling would have. Because disappointment feels heavier when your identity has been built around never causing it. Meanwhile, Danny struggled in school constantly, and Mom helped him for hours. Tutors, encouragement, long talks about stress and pressure. And I remember watching all of it, thinking something I hated myself for thinking. What would happen if I stopped being okay too? Would anybody come running for me like that? Or had I already taught everyone I didn't need them? That's the trap of being the dependable one. The better you are at surviving quietly, the less people notice you're surviving at all. Dad started coming around again when Danny was about 12. Phone calls, weekend visits, baseball games. I remember standing beside the field one afternoon, watching Dad hand Danny a brand new glove. Danny looked so happy. Dad looked proud. And for a second, I let myself feel hopeful too. Like maybe this meant he was coming back for me too. Then Dad looked over at me and said, "Good to see you, Jordan." Good to see you. Like I was somebody he used to work with. Like I was a neighbor. Like I wasn't his son standing there trying not to look hurt. I said, "You too." Then walked back toward the dugout before my face gave me away. That's another thing nobody tells you. When boys learn not to cry, they don't stop hurting. They just become experts at leaving rooms before the hurt becomes visible. In high school, people described me the same way constantly. Mature, independent, calm, responsible. I hated all of those words eventually. Not because they were wrong, because they were incomplete. Nobody ever asked what made me that way. Nobody asks why a child acts older than he should. They just compliment it. I dated a girl in college named Mia. One night we were sitting in her car outside my dorm, and she looked at me very carefully and said, "You know what's weird about you." I laughed and said, "Probably a lot of things." But she shook her head. Then she said, "You talk about painful things like they're stories that happened to somebody else." I remember going completely quiet. Because she was right. I could explain emotions perfectly, analyze them, understand everybody else's. But when it came to my own pain, I always sounded detached, like I was reading from a script. That's what happens when vulnerability feels unsafe for too long. You learn how to intellectualize pain instead of actually feeling it. My breaking point happened at 19. Not dramatically. No huge collapse, no movie moment. I was in my dorm room folding laundry. That's it. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe properly. My chest tightened. My hands started shaking. I sat on the floor trying to convince myself I wasn't dying. Turns out it was a panic attack. The first one I'd ever had. And even then, do you know what embarrassed me most? Not the fear. The inconvenience. I kept thinking, this is ridiculous. Get it together. Stop being dramatic. Because somewhere deep down, I still believed emotions only became acceptable after they were hidden properly. A therapist later asked me something simple. She said, "When was the first time you learned that your feelings made life harder for other people?" And I just sat there. Because suddenly, I was 7 again, standing in the kitchen, trying to be Dad's little soldier. Trying to deserve love through usefulness. That's the part that really stays with you. Not just the loneliness, the belief system. The idea that your value comes from how little you need. Dad and I talked last winter, really talked. For the first time in years, I stopped protecting him from the truth. I said, "You know, I spent most of my childhood trying very hard not to need anybody." He looked devastated hearing that. Then quietly said, "I thought you were okay." And I answered something I think about all the time now. I said, kids don't need things less just because they stop asking. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that tells you something true, finally entered the room. Dad cried a little after that, not dramatically, just quietly. And honestly, that was the first time in my life I saw him as a person instead of just the man who left. Broken people raise broken people sometimes, not because they want to, because pain travels quietly through families until somebody finally names it out loud. I'm trying to be that person now. Trying to learn that softness is not weakness, that asking for help does not make me difficult, that love should not feel conditional on how useful I can be. Some days I'm better at it than others. Some days I still apologize for things that don't require apologies. Some days I still instinctively say, I'm fine, before I've even checked if it's true. But healing is strange like that. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens when you let someone comfort you without earning it first. It happens when you admit you're struggling before you completely shut down. It happens when you stop treating your emotions like emergencies to hide. And maybe that's what I'm learning now. That I was never supposed to be a soldier. I was supposed to be a kid. And kids are allowed to cry.